Well, good afternoon. I'm Ken Bibrai, and welcome to Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. In the news today, President Biden has invited President Zelensky of the Ukraine to Washington tomorrow for meetings and to reassure him for the U.S.'s commitment to the region. Also, BAE Systems was selected for the first CHIPS Act grant by the United States for semiconductor development. Today's topic is social innovation and impact, and we have a great panel today. Tanya Beja, the managing partner of AlleyCorp Impact, and John Simon, co-founder, board chairman of Greenlight Fund. So good to see you guys.
Good to see you, Ken. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
So
great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Two quick things, right? Like when we started Coffee with Ken, I feel like it just kind of came out of this idea of social impact and innovation, right? And Tanya and I both went to the Kennedy School, and one of the key things I remember from there is to really solve societal problems and make true impact. You have to find issues that are kind of at that nexus of where business, government, and the nonprofit sector kind of coalesce, right? So I'd love to kind of hear a little bit from each of you about how you spend your days and how you fit in that Venn diagram. Maybe Tanya, we'll start with you real quick, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, most of my career has been in the impact investing space, thinking about what's the fastest, quickest, easiest way to alleviate poverty. And so I've tackled that question in the different sort of angles that you laid out, Ken. I started my career investing in the first and largest impact investing fund at the time called Ignia in 2010, investing in for-profit enterprises that were building something for the emerging middle class in Latin America, which is 80% of the population. I then switched gears slightly and did venture philanthropy at Robin Hood Foundation for a few years, and then spent the last few years building stuff from the ground up in the financial inclusion space. And at AlleyCorp, I spent most of my time and effort looking for tech-enabled ventures that are very deliberately building products or services that can be transformative for low to moderate income families in the US, so 80% of families in the US, across categories. And then I spent a tiny bit of time thinking about other ways to prop up solutions that address hardships suffered by low-income families that might not be profitable. And so we have a little bit of philanthropic funding, and we've propped up a program called Impact Engine that I can talk about a little bit afterwards. But at AlleyCorp, I get to do a bit of the three things that I did sort of beforehand in my professional career.
Nice. John, this is like your second rodeo, right? I mean, you had a pretty distinguished career beforehand. So tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so I'll follow my professional trajectory real quick and then say, how am I splitting time now? So, love building and creating things. And after college, graduate school, an initial job in the venture capital business, left that job to start my own company at 27, age 27, to see if we could make a difference in outcomes for urological issues, including prostate cancer, licensed some technology from Harvard Medical School, and built the company from just an idea, eventually into a 400-person company. We became a public company. And then after a total of 10 years, 6 as a public company, we sold the business. And at age 37, I retired from the operating business to help the next generation of younger, more energetic, forward-thinking entrepreneurs build their companies as an investor, mentor, and coach, and co-founded together with 3 guys I went to high school with. We were cross-investing each other's companies. A firm called General Catalyst has been very successful. And after 13 years of that, became a retired general partner, and but continued the thread of investing from Sigma Prime Ventures and from my own personal funds via Venture for Good in entrepreneurs that are trying to build something great that hopefully will be worth $1 billion someday, and really make a positive contribution to some sector of the economy, and build value for investors, shareholders, and customers. And I cut that back to about halftime over the last handful of years. Spent halftime investing in the for-profit area, and the other halftime on this nonprofit I co-founded about 20 years ago called the Greenlight Fund, which originally just operated in Boston and now is operating in 12, soon to be 15 cities, eventually hopefully to be 25 to 30 cities across the US, maybe someday even international. And basically just every year in every city pick off some issue, some metric that's not moving, bring something that worked in other cities, make it happen in our cities, and make change. And anyway, that's what the Greenlight Fund does. So right now, halftime, for-profit, not-for-profit, but all with the sort of conjoined goal of trying to make a positive difference in the world.
That's amazing. Well, here, Tanya, let me go back to you real quick, right? Like we know of, and lots of friends and colleagues are well aware of Kevin Ryan and all the amazing work and what Ally does. But talk a little bit about the impact aspect, the impact arm of AlleyCorp, and when did it start, and where you guys are in your own life cycle, and what success and metrics you're following year after year.
Yeah, absolutely. So AlleyCorp Impact was founded last year, 2022, and we focus on supporting for-profit primarily, but also nonprofit enterprises with a meaningful social impact. And so we define social impact as it means a lot of things to different people by who's benefiting from the product or service. And so we focus on the demographic, and we focus on low to moderate income or traditionally underserved families in the US across categories. And so that's the common thread that we look for. In the last year and a half since we launched, we've invested in 9 companies, mostly congregated in the areas of employment, education, or health equity. And so the future of work, sort of broadly defined, is a big focus of our work. And we basically look for impact that can be transformative for low-income families if it works out, if it's materialized. Mm-hmm. And so we look for business models that are intrinsically tied to the social impact in a way where the more social impact you have, the more business returns you have, the more you fuel your social impact. And so there's not necessarily a contradiction there, but they fuel each other. And we align with the KPIs that founders are already, for the most part, measuring, because they're key to make decisions in their own business. And so we report on those.
And this is for-profit and nonprofit, right? I mean, you kind of talk about that, because I feel like that's a unique aspect.
So the 9 investments we've made are all for-profit. So similar to the other 3 funds at AlleyCorp, we look for market rate returns, VC-like returns. And then that's 90% of our sort of resources and our bandwidth goes to that. We did prop up a program called Impact Engine to support nonprofits that are building tech-enabled products or services that we find meaningful, that we want to support. We found that in-kind support is sometimes even more valuable than the capital. And when it comes to technology builds, especially for nonprofits sometimes don't have the budget to pay for tech builds, don't have the team to oversee the build, don't necessarily have the gravitas to compete for very scarce engineering support. And so we propped up Impact Engine, leveraging our 70-person team of engineers that we have in-house, spread between Montreal and Bogota, to lend their sort of expertise to build products and services that are aligned with our impact vertical and our impact focus that might never be profitable, but we think should be built. And so these are 2 distinct funds. Impact Engine does sort of nonprofit work on the one hand, and then AlleyCorp Impact is a for-profit sort of VC fund.
So when we were having this conversation, just like when we were first meeting a couple of weeks ago and chatting, I think you were kind of sharing about this. And then John, I think your eyes lit up a bit, right? Like, how do you hear stuff like this, like what AlleyCorp and Impact are doing? And what does it make you think about, right? Because I feel like your mind is kind of like churning with like, okay, I can connect these dots and I can force multiply this way and X, Y, and Z. How do you think creatively with Greenlight, right? Like what role are you trying to kind of amplify?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, in some ways what Tanya is doing is sort of fuses my 2 interests, but I kind of separate them a bit. So I'm looking on the venture side for investments that are doing good, that aren't doing harm, but fundamentally, I'm looking at, example, a company like Phenom People, which is making software to help companies recruit people at much lower cost and much more efficiently. And that company's grown from like nothing to $150 million a year in revenue over the last few years, and unicorn, but legit unicorn, and headed in the right direction or whatever. But, they're serving affluent customers, right? Yeah. Companies that are paying, several $100,000 a year or millions of dollars a year for the software. And that is an investment for gain, right? So that's kind of what I'm looking for generally on the investment side is, investments that are going to create a lot of MOI and returns. And of course, then for me personally, those gains are going to go into charity, nonprofits, principally Greenlight. And then the other mode of my bimodal existence is, Greenlight and helping make Greenlight successful, which is helping make one change per year happen in cities. And so now that we're 20 years in and we're operating in 12, soon to be 15 cities, and we brought 50 things to those cities that otherwise wouldn't be there, unlocking $100 million a year of state, federal, and other resources, impacting, 500,000 children and families a year, scaling to millions. And so these are two sort of separate things, really. But what's interesting about what Tanya's doing is she's trying to sort of fuse that activity. And where my mind runs is obviously the things that she's investing in for profit. It might be that we might be able to help one of those, get to Charlotte, which is one of our cities, by, let's say that it works with the public school system to make a huge change in education, but the public school system is going to pay. Greenlight might be able to work in partnership with the public school system and fund the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system to help get this in the budget, help make it happen, and create change for tens and tens and tens of thousands of students, years and years into the future, with something that, AlleyCorp is backing. So even though it seems like a separate activity, there could be lots of places to share thoughts and ideas. And it's all about scaling models that work and getting them to cities to actually impact residents. Yeah. Just say one more word about Greenlight, where we're focused really a lot on communities driving change. And residents don't want status quo. There's all these great stuff happening in cities, but what about all this stuff that's not happening? What about all these needs that aren't being met or these issues that aren't moving? And whether it's a for-profit mechanism that could move that or a not-for-profit, residents don't really care. They want it in the city. They want it to work. And Greenlight's responsibility in any city that we're in is to do one great thing a year. So there could be a lot more synergy than, sure, at first glance meets the eye.
And when you're thinking about that, John, real quick, just the piggyback, are these really ground up sourced opportunities per city, right? Like you're not coming in and saying you are just going to tackle education in every city and we're just,
Exactly.
So explain that process. Like Greenlight means you're literally like green lighting resources to a community, right? Like, so just real quick on that.
Exactly. What's really important about the Greenlight model is that it's locally driven and it's community driven and it's a pull model. So rather than saying, hey, we've done all these great things, we're setting up in Greenlight Denver that we're, about to announce in a launch event February 8th at Metropolitan State University in Denver. Greenlight Denver, $6 million to support all these incredible people involved, enable us to make Denver our 13th city. And in 6 years, we're going to do 4 or 5 things that make change happen on 4 or 5 dimensions in Denver. But rather than saying, oh, we've done all these great things, this is what we want to bring to Denver, it's the exact reverse of that. Yeah. We raise the fund, we make Greenlight Denver happen, we hire a local executive director, we build a local selection advisory council. And then every year we run a community-driven process, talking to residents, talking to United Way, talking to the school system, talking to school superintendents, talking to state agencies, federal agencies, the mayor, et cetera, basically asking the question, what's not happening in Denver? What's a metric that's really bad that everybody wants to change that isn't changing? What do people want us to focus on this year to make change? And basically the community is telling us, all right, here's the change, here's the metric that we really want change this year. And then Greenlight goes and finds something that works in 7 other cities, but wasn't in our city. Turns out it was a missing puzzle piece, if you will. We give it $600,000 to $800,000 million, help make it happen in our city with a whole 5 to 10 year plan, how it's going to be successful and make change. And that's what we do every year in every city. So the important thing is that it's a pull network. It's every city locally that's deciding, and Harvard Business School did a whole case study on this, applicable, they feel, to not just for-profit, but not-for-profits and for-profits. How do you create a brand and an activity that is going to happen, you can stand behind, and but yet it's locally driven, and yet in every city, like we know in 20 years, the 16 things that Greenlight Kansas City does
Yeah.
will be on brand, on mission, but they'll all be decided in Kansas City by Kansas City residents. What do we need that we don't have? And it all starts there.
Yeah. So, Tanya, talk a little bit about your experience at Robinhood, right? Inherently a New York-focused anti-poverty organization, but now you have this new platform with AlleyCorp, right? How were you thinking about that experience and taking this platform and scaling and growing?
Yeah. So at Robinhood, I was there for 4 years. It was a fantastic learning experience for me, and very similar to John's model. Robinhood is the largest philanthropic funder of all social services in New York City. And so they fund the top 200 top performing nonprofits in the city across every single category that you can think of: education, health, food, legal services, immigrants, etc. And so at Robinhood, I helped manage a portion of the homeless and housing portfolio, a portion of the workforce development portfolio, and a portion of the immigrant portfolio. Similar to the Greenlight Fund, I think the secret sauce, there are lots of like good things that Robinhood does, but I think part of the secret sauce is being hyper local and is being super grounded in the communities that you serve in a way that you know who the key sort of players are and what are the specific leverage points that you can catalyze as a philanthropic funder in a very particular community where you have a very deep understanding of the needs of that community and how to judge whether you're successful or unsuccessful. And so I loved my experience at Robinhood. I did a lot of things that I find super incredibly meaningful. My frustration, not with Robinhood, but with philanthropy at large, is that its philanthropic dollars are very, very hard to come by. And very solid nonprofits with a solid track record always devote a disproportionate amount of their time to fundraising and then come up short a bunch of the time. And so my motivation for joining AlleyCorp was really discovering these investments that can be sustainable, that can be profitable, that are tech-enabled and can therefore achieve scale easier than maybe a non-for-profit can. And so I'll give you an example, Ken, because John did a great job describing sort of the two bookends that he was working at in a particular space. And so bridging those two bookends, our very first investment was in a company called Upwage. So very same space as John's unicorn, but focused on building an AI-powered pathway connecting America's 53 million workers making less than $16 an hour with better paying jobs in their communities. And so unfulfilled jobs that are at an unprecedented 20-year high in the US, and they're predominantly low-wage industries. And this labor shortage will persist well into 2030. And in response to this, 60% of employers are actually raising wages. And yet they still can't fill their shift or distribution centers or manufacturing centers. And so Upwage is building a world-class mobile-first app to help hourly workers search for jobs in their immediate vicinity, highlighting wage per hour, which are the two things low-income folks care about: proximity, geography, and wage. And channeling them towards better paying jobs on the D2C side. And then on the B2B side, employers work with Upwage to personalize AI screeners for any role, which saves them time and money in the process and allows them to fill positions earlier, quicker, faster, cheaper. And so these are the kind of things that I find really exciting, because if it works, it's backed by tech that can actually scale, and it has a very viable revenue stream coming from businesses that hire, a big cadre of low-income wage workers that are incentivized to find better ways to retain and attract talent. And so, I think a lot of what I do at AlleyCorp is informed by what I found worked really well at Robinhood, and what I found didn't work that well either, because there are strings attached to the kind of things you can do normally with philanthropy.
Yeah. Well, John, I'll let you reply too, because I think intentionally you're not even in New York City, right? Like Greenlight.
Yeah, because Robinhood is doing such a great job for starters, and we trade ideas with Robinhood, right? So some people, it's definitely a simplification. It's not exactly true, but some of our national supporters kind of say like Robinhood for New York City, and Greenlight sort of for the rest of the country. And we trade ideas with Robinhood because we want to know, what do they do, let's say, in the area of affordable housing that really moves the needle, that they love, that then we can think about for our cities, which have dramatic shortages and issues with affordable housing. Because if they do something that works, and let's say it's funded by HUD or whatever, and we can now take that to 3 other cities, if the cities need this and want it and pull it in and make it happen and then get that HUD funding to flow. But so it really helps to just trade ideas back and forth. But I want to just take off on something Tanya said, which is, as she was describing this, obviously, if you're an entrepreneur and you want to make social change, and you could do something as a for-profit or a not-for-profit, because there's economic rent to be had, I would always suggest first do it as a for-profit if you can.
Yeah.
Because let's say you're doing something to change outcomes in eating disorders, and you could do it as a for-profit or not-for-profit. You do it as a for-profit, and then you can save insurers money, provide better access to patients, better care, better outcomes. There's all this economics that are going to drive you to success and scale and reaching thousands and thousands and thousands of patients per year. And I'm involved in a company like that called Equip, which has done just that. But that's an example where there is economic rent. Sometimes you want to make a difference, and that difference is serving the most vulnerable, the least able to pay, and you can make that difference. And let's say you can make that difference by working with the public school system to do it. But the public school system is never going to pay you enough money to be a for-profit, but enough to cover costs. Well, then you're a not-for-profit. But still think about your business model.
Sure.
Because the more that you can be a not-for-profit, but think about a business model where you can get costs covered, the more scale and expansibility you can have. So, first recommendation, think about what you want to do. Think about what kind of business model is achievable to get scale and sustainability. If it's enough that you can be a for-profit, do it as a for-profit. If not, still worth doing, but you can probably do as a not-for-profit. So anyway, the way to think about it.
And I completely agree with that, John. I think the one thing that I think we could be doing better, as a society is mapping out where folks can get funding and partnering with each other to move companies and ventures along the spectrum, right? And so if you're a newly incorporated nonprofit, these are the set of folks that will invest in you in the social impact space. Once you're growing, these other sources of capital open up, and there's pathways, and there's passing of the baton from one set of funders to another set of funders. Similar to what we see in the pharma space, where it's very, very clear, if you need R&D money, this is where you go. If you're at a point where you're scaling a drug that's able to be commercialized and has passed the FDA approvals, this is the type of funding that you can get. And so building that sort of mapping in the social impact space, I think, would be incredibly useful.
So real quick,
it's a lot more opaque. It's a lot more opaque than it is in the for-profit world.
So I feel like 2.5 years ago when we were having talks on social innovation, it was at a time where companies could raise money in gobs, interest rates were low, nonprofits, philanthropy seemed to be, doing well. It's a different day today, right? Like, so where do you see the pressure, the challenges? Is it harder for founders to innovate these companies because of pressures from, raising funds? Is it harder for nonprofits because people are slowing down because of the economy? How does all that play out to what's kind of probably a path that seemed to be accelerating on both fronts?
I'll take that first, Tanya. I'll take it. So I think that what we have happening in the financial markets is actually healthy. I think most venture capitalists would agree with that, unless they had set up growth funds to invest in pre-public go-go companies. Because basically what's happening is there's plenty of funding available for seed, Series A, Series B, and at good terms too. But you have to really prove that you're an expert and you're going to do something, become a leader. There is an economic model, there's a long-term economic model for it. So the hurdle is higher, which means we're attracting entrepreneurs that aren't tourists. They really have conviction around something, and they really think they could be the best in the world at it. It needs to be done, and there is an economic model. So this is, if you look historically, venture firms that slow down in times like this don't produce as good of returns as the venture firms that kind of keep their pace steady. And so there actually is quite a bit of money. And I'm not aware of any like world-class project that is going unfunded or isn't having, money thrown at it. Okay. It's just the hurdle rate is higher and the valuations may be a little bit more rational, but that's okay. There's still plenty of room for founders to make gazillions of dollars and for venture investors to make returns. On the nonprofit side, actually, we don't see funds changing at all. I think the big opportunity, the U.S., we have a couple percent of our, gross national product that kind of is in donated to charity. I think long term, and that's big in comparison to other countries, right? There's a much lower metric, in the UK or in Germany or whatever, because they really rely on government more, where we rely on sort of private solutions that interact with government, which I think is very healthy. But the big thing is, could that grow? Could that be 3% someday? Could it be 3%? And I think it's incumbent on the sector to present such compelling value propositions to grow the pie, because there are spectacular things that can be done. They just have to be put in front of donors who absolutely have way more capital on the shelf than is currently being deployed. And just to give an example, this last year across our cities, we've made 10 selections, across 10 of our cities, and about 4 of them are sort of technology-enabled nonprofits, which is a trend we're seeing more and more. And these are absolutely incredible models that most donors, if they knew about, would want to back up the truck for, to help them get to more cities faster, et cetera. And so we've got to produce more compelling content and value propositions like that, and more donations will flow. That's the big idea.
Nice, Tanya.
And we're seeing a very similar picture as John on the for-profit side, in the sense that, when I look at our portfolio, the last 2 deals we've made were oversubscribed 3x in 2 weeks, right? So I think the exceptional founders are out there that are really solving a very salient pain point, can find funding relatively easy. I think what has happened, and what I think is real also at the same time, is funds are earmarking a portion of their funding to support their portfolio, maybe even more so than a few years ago. And so I think if you're not in that, quartile of extraordinary founders, I think there's still capital out there, but it's harder to get. And we have seen fundraising in general take a bit longer. And so I think being prudent with, how you're spending and what you're spending on is really important in an environment that definitely has corrected over what it was a few years ago. And it does feel like a healthy correction, but where funding is not as plentiful as it was before.
So Tanya, this is a young entity within AlleyCorp, right? Like as you roll into 2024, how do you envision spending more of your time? Is it with more potential startups, private companies that are for profit? Is it with more nonprofits that are tech enabled, like John mentioned? How are you thinking about your time and kind of like, if we talked again next year, like what will you be happy to have seen?
Very similar to how I've spent it this year, actually. So no huge changes. So I think the bulk of our time and effort is around investing in early stage, pre-seed, seed, sometimes Series A, tech-enabled for-profits, while also supporting a very select number of nonprofits to build sort of their tech. Within the for-profit side of things, I do increasingly find myself spending more and more time supporting our portfolio, rather than just investing in new things. I think that happens as you build a fund, right? And you have a portfolio. I think a lot of my time is spent on sort of strategic advice and potentially sitting on boards, fundraising, business development, opening doors, sharing networks, that sort of thing, to make sure that our portfolio companies have the sort of the highest chances to grow and succeed.
So John, as you think about the future, you're getting kind of a critical mass of data and impact, I would assume, right? Like you're 12, 13 cities, you're going to be 15 in no time. You promised me Washington will be number 16, like you're on your way. how often now are you just connecting dots where you're like, okay, this is a crowdsourced problem from the community in Milwaukee. We need to do what we did in Boston there. And it's just like step and repeat. Like, is that going to start happening? Is it already happening? How does it play
I
out?
mean, more and more. I mean, so again, we're talking now, we've done 54 selections across our cities. If we talk this time next year, that number would be approaching 66.
Yeah.
Because we're not only keep growing and building the things we brought to cities, but in every city we'll do another selection. And if we were to talk, 4 years from now, that number would be, close to 130 or whatever. So, and obviously the problems are similar. So when we're looking at student mental health in Dallas, let's say across we might learn from something we've done in Charlotte, or something we've done in Atlanta or whatever. But we want to always be an open network.
Yeah.
So because we have a couple thousand things that we've learned about over the years that are in our national database that are qualifying solutions in a nonprofit issue X in a measured way. And 3 or 4 cities. Those kind of things in my cities. But that's not a static, here it's like the best. Same thing with Chicago or whatever. Well, with all their model, and it's been 6 cities, and could Greenlight bring them to the cities or Boston or the Bay? And so that I'll keep growing. So we don't say, okay, 5 years from now, we're looking at student mental health in Dallas. We just do mechanically the things we've already done in 3 cities. No, it's going to be a new process every year. What does Dallas most need? What's the best fit? And also, what's there the most data on? Yeah. So we've done something, let's call it organization X in 4 different cities. But by the time we're looking in Dallas, there's something in Tanya's portfolio that's even better and incredible and even more cost effective and even more long-term effective. And we could work with DISD to bring it to Dallas. We're an open network. That's what we're going to do, because we're going to make the best choice for Dallas. So we'll never get complacent.
Yeah.
Changes in government funding. There are now things we're bringing to cities that didn't exist. So the beauty of the diamond of issues, right? An issue that can't kind of there. But unfortunately, so the American dream isn't quite right. Like saying that your kids will have a powerful experience. So there's nowhere near the social mobility. Plenty of them. But what you really want is that number to be way higher. And that's not going to change unless we make change. And that's what we're all trying to do.
So John, let me talk to you about how we can help each other with mental health in Dallas. we have one portfolio company that we supported early investment called Morrow, and Morrow supports youth mental health and well-being through early intervention and risk detection across school, home, and clinical settings. And so what that means is that nearly 50% of all mental illnesses, and I'm sure you know this through your work, but begin before the age of 14. And there's an 11 age gap between first symptom and first treatment, leaving children struggling without mental health or being treated as adults with pretty poor outcomes. And mental health is the known impediment to learning, especially in grades. So employs a support for students. And so they screen students and deal with parental consents, distribute in schools. And then for those students that are flagged as high, they have a network of their kids too. And then they have a bunch of educators with personal development as a teacher. And so they are trying to unify sort of school and setting and add some sort of that maybe some sort of signs of mental illness. And so this is tech enabled, it scales. They're being taken up by 9 schools. It's nascent, right? And so I wonder if there's an opportunity to pilot Morrow in the schools that you are in. And if it works, then to grow that program.
Yeah, and the business model is paid for by schools, but then, or how does that work?
It's paid for by schools. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's by number of students.
This is a classic example, right? This stuff is going on around us, right? And we're not aware of it. I don't know whether the folks who head up portfolio and data and intake at Greenlight know of Morrow or not, but they should, right? And so. Yeah, we can talk offline, but we want to know about it. We want to take our system and whether the ones that are the best here is that there's a lot of them, right? But we're not taking it especially AI and customization offers a lot of Tuesdays and but big thing is we need because with this it's but that and like nothing changes how they are but easy and how to really and government use data funding This area wants to allocate resources. There's a lot of
So
we just have to think always.
Yeah. So you're thinking of your sector agnostic, like if a company comes in and they have a great, and the reason we got a question, I don't know if it came to me or all of you guys, but David in New York is working on a sustainable agriculture program. He's agriculture. Is it an open door on your end? Are you looking for kinds of ideas? And if it makes the business, or are you trying to drill healthcare and economic mobility?
If there's a in New York City, all the better, but that's not a requirement. And so technical sector service, they can form it for low income across categories. And so we look for business fundamentals, we look for address market, social problem embedded into huge and it works
relationships through Tanya Beja connected. What's your call action? What is take great ideas and then scale if you tested it in the risk? So maybe you, Tanya, I'll wrap up with you.
Sure. So I'll start with an example in a portfolio. We have a company is developers as the works, there's an earmarking of funding that should be going to diverse firms.
Yeah.
And it frequently goes unallocated because contractors have a pretty difficult time figuring out where the diverse firms are, whether they're qualified to take on that job and vet them in terms of their track record. And so it brings all this together so that it's transparent and easily accessible to contractors. And the city of New Rochelle actually just all the $1 billion annually, and the government is really with diversity, and the facility can be super interesting for government leaders to know about and to endorse in some facet.
I mean, as somebody who works in real estate, I mean, I'm just looking. I put it in the chat for everybody. Toughleaf, look at Morgan's new headquarters in Manhattan is a case study of theirs as well. So that's literally thank you. Now I can look at that site when we're kind of bidding out stuff for projects that we're doing around the country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just chime in by saying that government's just government, but look at the data for where are the problems, and just don't be like overly content, right? With because where the problems are, maybe try to stop on every year. Okay, in addition to doing what we're doing, we're going to see if we can't move the needle on all problems, right? Yeah. And if you sort of think that way, and of course. Then let's do what we're doing, but think about moving on 10 problems and then problems. And so, but start to create these success stories. So look at data, where are problems, where are things not moving, be honest about it, humble about it, and then say, okay, maybe we have funding for that's available, but let's figure out what could work. And then, work within it, like, maybe something, okay, we have needs, funding stream. Can somebody find something that works, make it happen here, and we can make change, right? Some of us and is up over 20 years, change fees, collaborative partnership. City states or cities that come to us every year. Here's an issue of funding. Greenlight Fund dovetailing of clear good firms ultimately the most powerful.
Well, I'm so glad today, and we're rehearsing it. So, this is already a successful talk, but based on folks watching at home and just this conversation, I think we're hopefully going to be in more regular touch with both of you. So I want to thank you both for being here today.